Okay, let's talk AP bioevolution. So the first thing that you have to understand about evolution is that there's three things that really cause an animal to change traits, right? These are called selection styles. So you have natural selections, as you can see in this picture. The bird is going after this blob because it has a round tail or a round like hat, but it won't go after this one because it's a pointy hat and it'll get hurt. That's why the pointy-headed blob can have a child and reproduce and pass on its genes, while the round-headed one will die and not be able to do that. Now, artificial selection is when humans decide who does and doesn't, pass on their genes. So, if you've ever seen, actually, this is just a interesting thing. Look up like OG banana or original banana, and you will see that that thing is chock full of seeds. There's like so many of them, and they're like really green and do not look tasty at all. So, if you're ever wondering what the monkeys were eating way back when, that's what they were eating. Then you have sexual selection. As you can see, this blob right here has his hat swept back, and he's attractive to this girl blob, so he gets to pass off his genes, while this one with this silly looking hat, he does not get to pass off his genes because he's not attractive to the girl blob. Usually, the blob or the species with the most or who puts in the most energy in reproduction will be the one who decides what traits are sexually advantageous. So, for example, peacocks, female peacocks, they're the ones who have to do the egg birthing, right? They're the ones who are doing the hard, like heavy lifting. But they will decide, oh, do I want to mate with a boring peacock or those famous ones with those huge ass like tails and stuff. Then we have to talk about like characteristics of adaptable populations. So there's these things called selection pressures, which we'll talk about in a second. These selection pressures that will make it hard for some animals to survive depending on what they are. And the only way that they, as a species, can live on is if their traits can change. And that means that they have to have high genetic variation. That means that each like offspring is relatively different from the rest of them, and they have to have high reproductive rates. So think like mice, spiders, like things that just like rapid fire reproduction. Now let's talk selection pressures. So this is like stuff from the environment which makes some traits beneficial and some not. So these are all the things that are present in like natural selection. So predators, like right here, disease, climate change, competition for resources with other blobs, pollution, habitat loss, parasitism, etc. Okay, let's talk about selection types. So after natural selection, artificial selection, sexual selection takes place, one of three usual graphs will show up. So apparently I named the blobs Blimbos, and originally the Blimbo like top variation was some of them had that round top, some of them had that spiky top, and most in the middle had this weird like spiky round one. So this black one right here in the middle is what it usually looks like. So directional change, it shifts to one side or to one extreme because one kind of trait is more beneficial than the other. So for example, with this example I showed here, it could be because this bird was introduced to the habitat, and now all the spiky blimbos get to live, and all the rounded bimbos will get killed off. Stabilizing change, extreme becomes inviable. So maybe it happens that the top of the middle blimbo, can dig underground for vegetables and stuff like that, and get more food and more nutrients, and it'll be able to pass off its traits way easier. So the stabilizing, it will stabilize into having these two be more like inviable in comparison to this one, which can just eat the vegetables from the ground. Now diversifying change, which is like in the middle. So just being this one, there is no use to that. I can't really think of an example with such a silly little species like this, but believe me, there is one. For example, let's say there's lizards in stormy weather. It is, I'll come back to this. Okay, let's say that there is lizards, and this is actually weight. So these lizards are super light, and these lizards are super heavy. So maybe the super light ones get to live on because they're super quick and they can run away from predators, while the super heavy lizards are too big for the predators to eat, so they just won't go after them at all. So the ones in the middle, the ones that are just right, those are the ones that are going to get eaten. That's what would cause a diversifying change in the middle. And when the diversifying change gets like too extreme, it will lead to speciation, which is when two populations can no longer make fertile offspring because they are too varied. Okay, let's talk about niches. So a niche is basically a habitat that an organism is in. So the bugs that live in the log, their niche is that log. And, same thing with the moss that's near the log and the mushrooms that are near the log. It's all based off that just dead tree. That's the niche. And now this niche is filled with abiotic and biotic factors. And abiotic factors are like non-living things. So in my log scenario, you could argue that, yeah, that dead log, no longer living, so that is an abiotic factor. Same thing for sunlight, rainfall, stuff like that. And a biotic factor could be the living things around that niche. So let's say a woodpecker that is poking through the tree, trying to eat all those bugs, trying to eat the tree. Or the moss on the tree that's growing, or the mushrooms that are growing around the log, stuff like that. That would be a biotic factor that could introduce new animals and make it more beneficial for them to be in that niche and stuff. Let's briefly talk about genetic drift. So this is the whole idea of speciation taken to an extreme. So there is a few ways that speciation can occur. There's one that's just the bottleneck effect. So as you can see, we have pointy, medium, and round blimbos here. And the ratio is 4 spiky, 2 medium, and 2 round. A bottleneck event is like just a chance event. So like a hurricane, a nuclear bomb, something crazy that kills off like a huge part of the population. So in this case scenario, I have a tornado that happened. And the tornado instead made the ratio from pointy, medium, and round to be 1 to 2. So now being a medium or a round trait is more beneficial than it is to be a pointy one. Or it's not more beneficial, it's more prominent, right? So there might be more animals as this blimbo species goes on that are more round or medium in comparison to the ones that are spiky. So the founder effect is similar to that, except instead of a part of the species dying, the species just goes somewhere else, right? So maybe a big gust of wind sent a bunch of seeds from a tree flying across a river, or in this scenario, some blimbos crossed the river, and over time, those two ecosystems that they inhabited are so different that the animals become their own species. So in whatever environment this is, it is more beneficial for them to be pointy triangle shaped than it is for them to be round. This is called allopatric speciation because these populations live in different geographic areas. Meanwhile, the complete opposite of that would be sympatric speciation, which is when this species and this species are in the same area and still evolve into two different animals, or two different species. So this is a phylogenetic tree. You might see this on your test. Basically, it's telling you that you have some common ancestor, and as traits get added on, you'll get like more and more speciated animals. So let's go through Blimbo evolution, I suppose. So you start with a round body, right, and that gets you this guy right here. And then you go to two eyes. Okay, well, you get this guy right here. Okay, now you have a hat. Your hat gets you this Blimbo, the one that we've been looking at this whole time. And then maybe you get one with two limbs. So this one has two hands, and this one has 2 feet. And that could be based off maybe this one right here, it runs a lot, so it's running away from all these species. While this one is the natural predator, and it can just like grab bugs from the ground. That's what the Blimbo does. A cladogram or a cladogram is relatively the same thing as a phylogenetic tree, right? You can see stylistically they look just about the same. So as long as you understand one of these, you'll understand the other. But if you don't, just keep on looking at it, maybe pause and take a good look at it. Okay, so speciation, we talked about it a little bit before, but there is like 3 types of speciation. There is your gradual, which is like traits change gradually over time. Okay, the species realizes that, having a pointy hat is actually more beneficial than having a round hat or whatever. Or you could have adaptive radiation. So this is when speciation happens really quickly when new niches become available. So this might be a scenario where allopatric speciation takes place. Like, okay, these animals get moved to a different niche, so they have to adapt to become a more suited animal for that environment. Punctuated equilibrium is long periods of like no change at all, and then sudden bursts of like a lot of like speciation and change and variation in the trait. Let's talk about divergent evolution. So this is when an animal has a common ancestor, and in order to adapt to various environments, it results in like similar structures but like 2 separate animals. So as you can see, the common ancestor of these 2 guys is the main Blimbo, and one gets hands and one gets feet. If you wanted a real animal, you could talk about how the wolf was the common ancestor for the dog and the coyote, right? One was a artificial niche created by humans, and another one was a more scavenger niche that it found out was more beneficial, because these wolves, they would get either hunted out or domesticated into dogs. So those were the 2 main options. So I mentioned the word homologous structure. A homologous structure is something that's like similar between the 2, but it might be used in like different ways. So the homologous structure here is the hat. One might use it for hunting, one might use it for digging, stuff like that. Convergent evolution is when 2 separate species evolve to have similar traits because of the environment, even though they have no common ancestor. So the bird and the butterfly, right? One's a bug, one's a bird. Completely different, okay? You're never going to be able to have these 2 get it on because they're just so varied. However, they both have wings that they both fly with. Or another example you could argue is maybe like trees. Trees brought into a jungle. Over time, they will adapt to become bigger and larger, just like the other jungle trees. So, okay, there you have convergent evolutions. 2 species, completely separate. However, they both evolve to suit that niche better and are now both taller. Right? Maybe you could argue the same thing with like dolphins. Dolphins and fish, they're pretty similar. Or orcas and sharks, right? They're both pointy teeth predators who, hunt smaller fish, but one's a mammal and one's a fish, right? So that's how that would go. The similar traits in this scenario are called analogous structures compared to homologous structures. It's, it's good to know this, but you could probably get away with just like briefly referencing it. But, just in case, I would definitely recommend knowing what analogous structure has to do with convergent evolution and what a homologous structure has to do with divergent evolution. Now, the last thing I have on this paper is coevolution, okay? Coevolution is when two species influence each other's evolution. So think like a predator and a prey, a parasite and a host, mutualism, competitive species, etc. So it's like it's like a rat race almost. So, for example, rabbits are scared of foxes. So foxes over time develop an orange coat, which to the rabbits is actually seen as green, so they blend in better, and it makes it easier for the foxes to hunt. That would be an example of a predator-prey relationship. Parasite and host, maybe an elephant develops a more thicker skin to protect itself from the ticks that have been biting at it, or biting at its species over time, right? An animal can't just evolve randomly. It's all about random change happening slowly over time. There's no way about it. You can't just randomly evolve as a person. It's not like Pokemon. Okay, speaking of coevolution styles, there's three main ones. There's mutualism, parasitism, and communalism. So both species or mutualism is when both species benefit. So it's like I scratch your back, you scratch mine kind of thing. Parasitism is when one is being harmed and the other one's benefiting. So that could be predator-prey, parasite-host, stuff like that. Like, you do not want to be the one who is being harmed, obviously. Communalism is when one species does benefit and the other one just doesn't care, right? So, for example, there's this fish that feeds off the like little scrapings off the shark, and the shark doesn't eat it. It doesn't really care, right? Because it will grow back new teeth later. It doesn't really need these ones cleaned. But these little fish, they get, free food just because they walked up. And I don't have this on this paper, so it's good to actually know this, but there's facultative and obligative mutualism. So facultative mutualism is when, you will benefit from the other person, but you don't really need that, like, other species in your life. I can't think of a good, animal example, but let's say, whenever me and my friend are going places, he drives me places because I can't drive myself, hypothetically. And once in a while, I'll go buy us a drink. So I'm benefiting, he's benefiting. We don't really need each other though, right? Because if I were to, stop being friends with him, I can just walk places. I'm not going to die if I don't do that. However, with obligative mutualism, you want to think, for example, technically it's not, but a good way to think about it is bees and flowers. So if a bee gets all its food from these flowers and the flower can only be pollinated basically by the bee, they both need each other for food. One needs it for food, one needs it for reproduction, right? That's how that works. So next we're going to talk about zygotic factors. Zygotic factors are something that prevent a species from making a zygote. So there's two kinds. There's prezygotic, which is before coitus, and postzygotic, which is after. So habitat isolation, you live in different areas, okay? So if I were to talk about this like in persons, You live in Florida, she lives in New York, okay? It's basically impossible for you guys to, you know, start dating, I guess. Temporal isolation, breeding times are different, right? So let's say one bird species only mates at night, while another bird species only mates in the day. Okay? These species will never intermingle, never, make a zygote with each other because it just doesn't make sense for them to. They don't want to mate at the same time. Behavioral isolation, it's when there's different mating rituals that the other party does not, find so sexy. So this is like basically the ick, except for like real deal animals. Mechanical isolation, which there's physical incompatibility. So like the key doesn't fit the lock. Okay, this is not going to work. This is not going to work. So there will be no zygote made in that scenario. Gametic isolation is when the sperm of one species can't fertilize the eggs of another, right? Crazy scenario, but let's say like the uterus is just too far away and the sperm can't reach it without dying for that specific species. A zygote will never be made. Now let's talk about post-zygotic species, okay? These two animals have got it on already. What can go wrong? So there's hybrid inviability. So the hybrid offspring don't develop properly. So let's say it's almost as if like the babies will die young. Like they're never going to be able to get to that age where they can reproduce or they can mate. Hybrid sterility is when hybrids, they live, they can do whatever they want. However, they can't reproduce. They can't make like fruitful offspring. And hybrid breakdown is almost the same thing as hybrid sterility, but it's for the next generation. So the first generation of hybrid offspring is fine, but the second generation, that's when it's infertile. And that's everything for evolution, I believe. Yeah, I think that is. Or maybe... yeah, we'll talk about this in the next video. Sneak peek at it right now. But we will be going over ecology next in the next video. All right, good luck on your tests. Bye.